going on?
He was acting up earlier, and it started.
Well, what's the? You know, how you have the thing of like how you click on something. So we just shine that? Huh? Should we just not do it?
I mean, the audio's on. If you want no video, I know it's kind of.
What's the value? I think I'm running out of patience for this. Let's just shut it.
Okay, that's not clicking.
Okay. I had an interesting experience just before coming here. A friend of mine, Amar Krishna, I've known him for 30 years. You remember Amar? Bengali, short, Pujari? Was he there when you were there? No, he was in Laguna. You don't remember him? When I became a full-time priest, I moved to India and I was a celibate monk for some years. All in all, I was a celibate for 9.5 years. And as I traveled around the world, I met other monks. And usually when you hear about monks, it's a permanent post. So a monk means celibate, no spouse, no romantic interest. And celibate with a capital C, so no fooling around, no masturbation, zilch. And so usually when you think of a monk, you think of a Catholic priest, maybe. I mean, they have a really bad name nowadays. It's almost synonymous with pedophilia, at least in the popular mind. But if you're a student of, it's not going to work, I need to get off the ground. Come back in a minute, but I just got to get off the ground. It's a little too much for me. Try and make it work. Just try and do more than just hanging out. If you're a student of religion, you may have noticed that Protestant Christians, when I say Protestant Christians, I mean everybody but the Catholics and the Orthodox. You guys heard of the Orthodox Church? Most people don't know much about the Orthodox Church, but the Catholics aren't the only game in town. Catholics and the Orthodox were the same tradition up till about 1000 AD. So roughly, just a little over 1,000 years ago, or maybe just under 1,000 years ago, in the mid 11th century. There was a big split, and there was an Eastern Church and a Western Church. The Western Church, their headquarters was in Rome, and the Eastern Church, their headquarters was in Constantinople, which nowadays is known as Istanbul, in Turkey. Most people don't know this, but if you read the Bible, Turkey was a huge place where they were doing outreach in the early Christian church. So you had, the Christendom, the world of Christianity, it spread out everywhere. That's why you have Christians in Syria and Jordan. It goes east in the Middle East, and then you've got westward. You've got all the way to Ireland, and kind of that whole most of the Western world was Christian, and there were bishops, and they had different areas they were in charge of. And then the Bishop of Rome was the Pope. And they came up with this doctrine called infallibility, that whenever the Pope was speaking on religious matters, he was infallible. And they came up with another doctrine called the primacy. And that was, amongst all the bishops, the Pope was the most important. He was the first among equals. And so effectively that meant the Pope became, actually the word, kind of the papacy and papal, these are Roman terms for rulers that were adopted by the Catholic Church. And so the Pope in many ways became the king of Europe. There were kings, but the kings were all Catholics, and so they had to pledge fealty to the Pope, pay homage to the Pope. And the Pope was, in many ways, an emperor, the emperor of Rome. But that meant all the feudal lords, King of England, King of Germany, etc., they were all under him from the point of view of he was closer to God than they were, and they required his blessings. And so the popes wielded this just insane amount of power in the medieval world. And even up till fairly recently, to be honest. Even to this day in big parts of the world. So anyway, the Eastern Church, based in Istanbul, got upset and they broke free because they didn't like the idea that the Bishop of Rome was above them, and they didn't like the idea that he was considered infallible when speaking on doctrinal matters. The doctrine of infallibility doesn't mean the Pope is infallible, period. If he's infallible when he issues a papal decree, when he speaks on doctrinal matters. So they broke. So there's a huge split that most people are just entirely unaware of. And the Catholic world split into two. And then you had the Orthodox Church on one side, and you had the Catholic Church on the other. Of course, the Orthodox Church calls itself Catholic, and the Catholic Church calls itself Orthodox. Orthodoxos means proper belief, and Catholic means universal. And so each group was unwilling to let the other group have the title that they now claim. So the Orthodox Church that I was raised in calls itself the one true Catholic Church, and the Catholic Church also considers itself to be the Orthodox Church of Rome, etc. So they neither one of them was willing to give up an inch. There's been some ecumenical efforts at universalism and reconciliation have taken place over the last decades, but they've really been at loggerheads for, the better part of almost a millennium now at this point, practically speaking, 1,000 years. And so you've got the Western Church, which was the Catholics, and the Eastern Church, the Orthodox, and the Eastern Church would be like all of Russia, all the Slavic countries, all of Greece, and then extending into, the Middle East. Those would all be Orthodox churches. And the Catholics were more westward. So it really is split. So if you look at the Orthodox Church, they're not really into monks. They're into married priests. And if you look at the Catholic Church, married priests are no bueno. They're into monks. And if you look at the Protestants, everybody else but those two groups. The Protestant is, the King of Germany broke free from the Pope. And the Bible is translated into German, and actually Martin Luther, who was the catalyst for the entire Protestant Reformation, not Martin Luther King Jr., the one he was named after, Martin Luther, from the late 1400s, late 15th century. the written language of German was developed as part of an effort to translate the Bible into German. There was spoken German. Of course, we have a.
Invented the German written language.
That's right. Yes.
The Bible with common people.
That's right. So he's German, and this is known. You can wiki this, and I'm not making this up. But there was like a high German and a low German. There was like a southern and northern German. There were different German dialects. But there was no universally accepted written German language. In fact, that was developed by Martin Luther and others as part of an effort to translate the Bible into German, precisely so that it wasn't in Latin. The Bible's originally written in Greek, got translated into Latin by St. Jerome a few centuries into the Catholic Church. And that became known as the Vulgate. It's a Latin version of the Bible. The original Bible was written in Greek. But that was what was used. And so if you wanted to read the Bible, you wanted to be a priest, you wanted that kind of power, you had to study Latin, you had to go to Rome, and that was it was linked to a language. And we might not realize this, especially if you're not bilingual, but so much of our culture is embedded in our language. And so when you hold a sacred text in a particular language, it's practically speaking, other people don't have access to it. And so the effort to translate the Bible into German was this massive effort to break free from being under the popes. And it was such a big effort, they invented the written German language to facilitate it. That led to the translation of the Bible into Dutch Reformed Church. Before that was England, King James Bible. And that was the Protestant Reformation that, the majority of the world's Christians are coming from this. They have certain concepts. Sola fide, sola scriptura, only by faith, only by the scripture. You don't need a priest. You don't need to confess your sins. There's some hallmarks of all Protestant churches. I'm unaware of a single Protestant church that has monks. To my knowledge, all Protestant churches require their clergy to be married. Martin Luther, in fact, married a nun. He was a Catholic priest who was so fried with the debauchery and fakeness, he married a nun, not because he was some kind of lusty person. By all accounts, he was extremely austere, but he was trying to make a point, a political point. But if you look in the world of Christianity, usually when you get a church, it's divided. And you either have married priests or you have unmarried priests. And usually a church will be pretty solid, that this is what it's got to be. So if you for instance, if you're an unmarried Protestant, like if you're an unmarried Methodist preacher or an unmarried Baptist preacher, something like that, the first thing they're going to do before they give you a congregation and a church is they're going to get you married. They're not into it. Like all of my priests in the Orthodox Church, they were all married. And then you got the other side, Catholics, where if you want to be a priest, you absolutely have to be unmarried. You can become a deacon. There's 3 levels. There's a deacon, and then an elder, and then a bishop. The 3 orders actually Jesus came up with in the early church. And so you can be a deacon, but you can't become an elder or a bishop unless you're taking a lifelong vow of celibacy. The furthest you can go in the Catholic Church is a deacon, kind of an introductory level liturgical office, kind of a novice level office. So our tradition's not like that. We encourage, if you become a full-time priest, we encourage a period of celibacy that lasts some years. How long are you a brahmachari for? 10? 10? And then you, Sanak? 10.
Well, now I'm 18.
Huh?
After marriage, 18.
Oh, right, yeah, because your marriage didn't work out and you went back to being a brahmachari.
28 altogether.
If you want to give yourself credit on both sides. I don't I don't think it works like that. I think it's like a sobriety thing where if you drink, then you start the clock over again. So. Right. So anyway, I mean, we all joined around the same time. We were all monks around the same time, and we're encouraged to be monks and then to get married. And it's not that that's a sin or you've fallen down if you go from being an unmarried to a married priest. Rather, you're an unmarried priest for a certain amount of time to develop character and integrity. What's integrity? Somebody define integrity for me.
Doing the right thing even when no one's watching.
Doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Excellent definition. Yes.
Having a set of values and following them.
Having a set of values and following them. Either one of you guys want to jump in? Another excellent definition. You two knuckleheads, yeah.
I was going to say having values and then making the right choice even when no one's looking. But
Okay, so you're right, like kind of a joint version of what the two of them said. Excellent also. You were raise your
I
hand?
was going to say what they said.
Which was?
Having a set of values and being consistent.
Okay, great definitions. Integrity, same root as the word integer. Integrity means to be whole. Wholeness means that your actions match up to your values. You have a set of values, and then you live by them. You're integrated. You're whole. You have integrity. You've taken the trouble to arrive at a set of values, whatever those set of values might be, and then you live your life in accord with those values. So all your definitions were great. Good. You become a monk, you develop a set of values, you develop the ability to live according to them, and that goes on for a certain period of time. And if you want to get married, you get married, and you'll be a good spouse because you were good when you were single, so you'll be a good spouse. That's the idea. So in many ways, our tradition is really different, where instead of picking one, and that's our thing, married priests or unmarried priests, we have both. And there's some fluidity, there's some permeability between the two traditions of married and unmarried. And in fact, they don't have to be permanent positions. You're allowed to move between them. Yeah. I don't remember why. I mean, it was super tangential. What was I starting off with?
Your friend that used to be a Roman.
Oh, yeah. So we met when we were unmarried priests, living in the temple together. We first met in Montreal. And I went through Montreal for some reason or another in the early 90s. And I met this person. And eventually I got married and I took over the temple and lived in the beach. And he came and he stayed with us as like one of our on-staff priests. And we spent 12 years together, serving every day together. I saw him every day for 12 years. Then he moved to New Orleans and is down there, serving the temple there. And I haven't seen him in, 10 years or something like that. And then he called me up a couple days ago and said, hey, I'm coming to town with 40 friends. And they're all full Bengalis. He's Bengali. And they're all full Bengalis. And we're coming to town and we want to see you. So then they set up a program, and I went to the program, and there's a room full of Bengalis, and they know that I'm friends with this person. They wanted me to speak something, and so I had to give a class to a bunch of Bengalis, which is a fun task, because our tradition came out of Bengal about 5 centuries ago. Our tradition is a Renaissance movement, a part of a Bhakti Renaissance that took place in and around Bengal. Bengal and really Puri were the two, because they're the two main places where the Renaissance took place. Then we settled in Vrindavan, and that became another place of pilgrimage. But the groups of people were already living in these other two places, in Bengal and in Jagannath Puri in Odisha, a state just adjacent to Bengal, a couple states away. And so I'm lecturing to people who are native Bengali speakers, and many of whom were born in our holy area, in and around Mayapur, and grew up there. So they're all in their 50s, and they were either born into our tradition or born adjacent to our tradition, and they were born in Bengal or actually in our holy place, and they're all native Bengali speakers, which means our culture, tradition that I've made my own, it belongs to them in a way that it'll never belong to me, because it's just innate. They think in Bengali. There's a famous saying in Sanskrit that no matter how well you train the gymnast's son, the tumbler's son, he'll never walk fully straight upright. Because his whole life he's been rolling on the ground and doing gymnastics, and so he's kind of bent, you can't straighten the dog's tail would be an English equivalent. And so there's just something about being born into a culture and a language. It affords you a certain expertise. And just imagine all of the commercials that you know by heart from growing up watching TV. Just think about it for a second. All like the Burger King commercials or McDonald's commercials or whatever it might be. Huh? Oh, yeah, right? I went to Australia to fetch my wife, and this is my brother-in-law, Shreeds. And so Shreeds and I also lived together for years, and we started hanging out again. He came out for my son's wedding, so we got a chance to have a reunion. It used to be that there wasn't an internet. I know it's hard for you guys to believe that, and then if you wanted to book a flight, you had to call a travel agent. So Shreeds, when I was in Australia trying to get out, trying to book flights out from Australia in 1997, so it's 26 years ago, around this time, a little earlier, maybe 2 weeks ago, 26 years ago, I was trying to get out of Australia, and I had to call a travel agent to book flights for our whole family, and I was on hold forever, because that's what it used to be like. Like, I can remember there was a travel agency, I think we probably went there together. Did we ever go to a travel agency in Miami together? So 305-221-1212. No, that wasn't it. That's like information. That's 411. Anyway, I can't remember the number. All right, forget that one. But this one, I just broke it down on the streets. I'm like, we're Harvey World Travel. We're one big family. Harvey World Travel, the blue and gold. Australian people helping Australians to travel all over the world. That was it. On repeat. So somehow they paid someone to make that god-awful song, and it was like a nursery rhyme where travel all over the world, we're Harvey World Travel, we're one big family, Harvey World Travel. I mean, what an awful name for a travel agency. Harvey World, perhaps the worst name that the business person's ever come up with in their life. Anyway, so I remember that. Yeah, it's whatever it is, 26 years later, I remember it. There's something that happens when you're born into a culture. Anyways, these are native Bengalis. We're from a Bengali Renaissance tradition. What's Bhakti, by the way? Let's just do that real quick, make sure we're sharp. When I say the Bhakti Renaissance, what am I referring to?
Culture of loving God.
Culture of loving God. It's a good definition. I want something that somebody who doesn't know what Bhakti Renaissance means will be able to appreciate it. And if you guys if you don't raise your hand right away, Dom, You have to turn in your pundit card because you're ignorant. You don't even know the basics of our tradition. Really, you can't really call yourself a Hare Krishna if you can't answer this question immediately. Go.
Loving Krishna, God as a person, as a personal individual.
All right. Also good. Do you feel like that really defines it for someone who doesn't know what you're talking about already? Go.
The culture at the time was very ritualistic based, and Bhakti.
This is important because if you talk about a Renaissance, usually it means a restoral or a refreshing of something which has fallen into misuse. And so you have to talk about the precursor, so then the Renaissance becomes significant because you can contrast it to the precursor. So you're doing that now. That's excellent. Start again.
Yeah, so the culture at the time was very ritual based and had lost the essence of the tradition, which is the love of God as a person, and as we discussed. And the Renaissance brought that back and reintegrated that into.
That's better than the first two, but the first two were good. This one's better because it includes some definition of the base culture that the Renaissance is growing out of. Anybody else? Everybody should raise their hand. None of you should be shy about this. You should all be able to answer the question. You, for instance, Eric, should be able to answer the question. Sanakshi.
I guess in Bengala, the worship of the demigods had come in the foreground. Vaishnavism had been pushed down, and the Vedic scriptures was used to, he said it already, used for rituals and for demigod worship.
I think that's an incredibly important point. The problem you run into is if the person doesn't know what demigods are and demigod worship is, you've now made the problem worse because you've introduced yet another term that has not been defined. So it's important when giving a definition, this is a general rule, when you're defining something, that you never use language which is going to require another definition. It's an austerity, but you have to speak in incredibly simple terminology so that the person does not become more confounded by your definition. Who else wants to go? Yes?
I would include having a personal relationship.
Don't just throw something on. Start from the beginning.
Okay.
By the way, that's also an austerity when you define something, to take the trouble to start from scratch, which requires you to exercise your own memory, but makes it easier for the person you're talking to get the whole thing in one shot, so they don't have to argue, like, listen to them, and then it's just cheap. You just add a little something to it. You follow? Go ahead.
If someone were to ask me what Bhakti Yoga is, or Bhakti Renaissance is, I would tell them that Bhakti is having a personal relationship with a God that's all good, all loving, and all powerful, and resurrecting that from being ritualistic.
That's great. You could almost separate the word Bhakti from Renaissance, define Bhakti, and then add in the Renaissance idea, because most people are familiar with what a Renaissance is. That's good. Ish. I'm saying no. Like, how can you not answer my question? I'm your teacher.
I feel that they answered it already.
Nah, I don't think they answered it. I'm like, none of you, in my opinion, have wowed me. The integrity thing, I was like, okay, you guys crushed it. I was like, good. I added my own thing with the etymology of the term integrity, but you guys, independent of me, every single one of you nailed it. I don't feel like any of you have nailed it.
That's another go?
Yeah, of course you can. By the way, you guys, of course, can do no wrong. So Sanak and Radhe and Shreeds being my peers, even if I disagree with you, I can't really disagree with you because it's rude, so go ahead.
So to define Bhakti first, the word Bhakti means the act of service with devotion to God. But where Bhakti came in had been that, as you said before, Mahatma came in the let's not use Mahatma because I have to.
Boom. By the way, let me just interrupt Shreeds for a second, and I'm going to turn back to you. You see how sharp he is? Do you see it, Eric, or you don't? How is he so sharp?
He didn't want to bring in Mahaprabhu because he had
That was one place he was sharp. He picked that one up. You don't want to use another term. There's another one he did that shows he's sharp. What was it, Ross? He picked up on defining Bhakti separate from Renaissance. Third way in which he's sharp is he didn't just limit himself to what you said Bhakti was. He gave a cognitive behavioral definition of Bhakti. It's an act of service which has devotion. He gave a cognitive behavioral definition of bhakti, which included both an act as well as a mindset behind the act. He improved on your definition of bhakti, but he paced you and appreciated how you broke the two up, kept that, improved on your definition, then caught himself, as he said Mahaprabhu, like with the demigod thing, and stopped himself from that and chastened himself on the spot. That's what we're supposed to be doing in a class like today. We're working with stuff and we're learning. Back to you, brother.
Approximately 500 years ago, India became very ritualistic, where they were performing sacrifices and a lot of activities that weren't really related to God, more for material gain. One person, Nimai Pandit, actually he was a great pundit to start with. So first of all, he became the best of the best at what they were doing, and then he redefined it by acting this bhakti, the love of God, into what he was doing.
Way more full than what anybody else has said. Good stuff. I might not have thrown Nimai Pandit in there specifically, because that might add a question. Whether you say Mahaprabhu or Nimai Pandit, it's going to add a question. But he was unafraid of putting himself out there. Unlike you, Dom. He was unafraid of putting himself out there and spreading his wings and flying and going for it. And he took a few paragraphs to flesh out his idea and worked with it and tried to get somewhere. Your turn, Dom.
Bhakti is a culture where you're developing activities and moods to serve God for God's pleasure. And
That's a selfless element he brought up, which is a fleshing out of the point you made about devotional. So he added something to that, a selflessness. Keep going.
and it's done without any ulterior motive besides to please God. So that's what Bhakti is. I think that's everything in the
You're good. That's good.
Yeah, so the Renaissance is showing how that's really the essential idea in all the Vedic scriptures, is a personal relationship with God, and that people had forgotten that and missed that. But it's always been there, and so it was revived.
Good. I'm glad you spoke up. I think it's important that we own stuff and put skin in the game and try and work through stuff and share with people and express ourselves and are somewhat shameless about it. I think there's a problem when you don't put skin in the game. It makes the whole thing sterile and it makes it too safe. And there's a certain learning and a certain purification and a certain confidence and a certain expertise which will forever evade you if you don't put skin in the game and go for it. It's like studying dancing without ever getting on the dance floor. It just doesn't work. And so if you want to share ideas with somebody, and if you want to communicate with people, and if you don't want to communicate with people, you should probably see a therapist, because that sounds awful. Human beings are distinct from other animals precisely in that we have an unlimited capacity for communication. We have something called recursion in our language, where we can say things like, I'm going to the store with my friend on this day at this time to buy this thing for this party in this neighborhood. And then we went here, and then we went there, and then we did this, and then we did that. And we can join ideas together unlimitedly and have incredibly detailed communication with others. We have a massive prefrontal cortex, massive encephalization, expansion of our brain compared to other animals. And specifically our prefrontal cortex and the layers of our prefrontal cortex are unlike anything else in nature. And we have an almost unlimited capacity to think and to share those thoughts with others. And so if you are a human, it means you were born with a black belt in communication. And it's a tragedy if you don't use it. And you take yourself out of your comfort zone, and you stretch yourself out, and you share ideas, and you fall on your face, and you learn new things. And when you learn something new, you then share it with other people right away, and it gets galvanized and made your own. And if you make mistakes, you clean it up, and you just become a way, way more refined communicator. And the world becomes a smaller place, and you can relate to people so much better, and you live a much more fulfilling life, and you are a human being. And maybe you don't have to get to the gab, then you write. Find some way to share and interface with people. And you become such a better individual for it. Sanakji, you want to say something?
We could bring it back before we were speaking about Martin Luther King. He kind of brought the movement, when we speak about Renaissance, he brought the Bible and the religion back to the people. So Mahaprabhu actually took it away from the Brahmins who were claiming the right and brought it back to the people. That devotion.
Another good point. Another great point. Goes right alongside what others have said. Excellent. Evolving our definition. I'm going to take a stab at it now. And you guys feel free to critique me too. I'm into it. And I didn't prep for this either. So I'm also doing this fresh. I mean, I'm still on a tangent to the class I actually want to give.
Still want to give on Bengalis, but
Yes, I'm still, and I haven't forgotten that. But I'm still on a tangent for my introduction. I was doing an icebreaker that turned into a whole other thing. So, thanks. All good. Don't worry about it. Just glad you're here. So I'm also operating without a safety net, so to speak. And I'm inviting feedback. So you guys listen as scrutinizingly as you can. Here we go. Bhakti is a universal cross-cultural idea. The word bhakti comes from the Sanskrit root bhaj, which means to worship. But bhakti, as a word in Sanskrit, is used to denote a loving, intimate relationship with the divine. Now that divine, because there's a loving, intimate relationship, it has to be personal. Because love is always a unifying force between two individuals. Therefore, the Bhakti tradition is a tradition that views God as being the supreme being, the creator, the original lover. And Bhakti is a relationship about renovating, recreating, revitalizing that innate, dormant potential for a loving, intimate relationship with the Supreme. In fact, the Bhakti movement posits that that is the goal of human life. That human beings have a special capacity to love and think and feel, and that it finds its perfection when you turn that towards divinity and you love God. And so bhakti is both a goal, namely the reestablishment of this intimate relationship with divinity, and also the process by which you get to that goal. Therefore, it's the name for both the process as well as the goal of the process. And bhakti has cognitive and behavioral aspects. It especially places a premium on selfless devotion for the Supreme. Loving God just because. Not because of what's in it for me, but just because. As St. Augustine said, love is wanting the other to be, independent of what they do for you. Maybe at best exemplified by how a parent loves a child. At least, ideally, without asking for anything in return. Just giving. Just because. As its own reward. And so that innate best quality of a living entity, and especially of human beings, when turned towards divinity, is called in India bhakti. But you actually find this within all traditions. Therefore, it's a cross-cultural idea. And that idea is just, it's so beautiful, and it's such a razor's edge, and it's so elegant, and it's so powerful that inevitably things happen and entropy happens and things get lost over time. Just like there was a golden age of Islam, which then led to the Dark Ages. Sometimes that happens where there's a period of growth and then things go backwards. You get into a Dark Age period. And so that bhakti, although it's been around forever in the Vedic literatures and in other traditions as well, at some point it gets more obfuscated and it gets more hidden and it gets less fully fleshed out. And so about 500 years ago, along the eastern seaboard of India, roughly like in the northeast quadrant of the US, but within India, there was a Renaissance. And people say, hey, it doesn't matter what family you're born in. Forget the caste system. Forget whether you're a male or female, rich or poor, educated or uneducated. The only thing that matters is the quality of your heart, the quality of your love for divinity. And a tradition was born that systematized that. And Bhakti traditions generally have very simple ritual. And usually in the Bhakti tradition, you'll find kirtan is what they're into. They cry out to the divine. Based on the idea that the divine's always listening and is always interested in reconnecting. And therefore all you really need to do to achieve perfection is open your heart up and let go and let God. And so you find in Bhakti traditions, ritual is always minimized. And the quality of your heart and your prayer is what matters. And so there's always song, and there's always dance, and there's always crying out. And so that took place. Again, although it had taken place many times before that, about 5 centuries ago, that Bhakti movement underwent yet another renaissance on the eastern seaboard of India, and we are the outreach branch of that renaissance. And so the people who I was talking to today, as their priest, number one, they've likely been in our tradition as long or longer than me. And number two, they were largely born into it, and they had an innate appreciation for these ideas, so much so that these ideas were almost what might be termed a plausibility structure. They never even questioned these ideas. They never think about these ideas the way we are right now. Shridi, my brother-in-law, was born into this movement, as well as his good wife, Bhakti. They were both born devotees. And so they have this natural devotion. Dom was born into our movement too, so he has this natural devotion. Aurora, you've been around since your earliest years, right? Yeah, so your first memories, right? Aurora also, it's just natural. They were born into it. Narayan also born into it. Mahabala, born into it. From Russia, from Australia, from Colombia, from the US, from a different part of the US. Got a whole bunch of, devotees here who were born into it. And they drank it with their mother's breast milk. It becomes natural for them. These Bengalis also have that, but then some of our core texts are also written in their native tongue. Imagine if you were born speaking Latin. Just your ability to appreciate the Bible in Latin, or you were born speaking Greek, archaic Greek, philosophical Greek. And so not modern day Greek, but philosophical Greek. And so your ability to read the Bible, even amongst scholars, where that wasn't their native tongue, it's far out. You're just naturally abundant. You follow? Anyway, I had a chance to speak to a group of people like this, which is not normal. Obviously, regularly I minister to people from India, but this is ministering to people from our epicenter. It's like ministering, if you're Jewish and you're ministering to a bunch of Jews from Jerusalem or something like that. Or you're Muslim and you're ministering to a bunch of Muslims from Mecca who are all fluent in Arabic and were born speaking Arabic or born speaking Hebrew, raised on that language, their native tongue. And it was a lot of fun. And I want to share with you guys what that consisted of, but I spent way too much time doing the warm-up with you guys. So I will leave you with one thing. And if I did my job right, it'll all come together. And we'll have a denouement movement, or moment. A denouement in a piece of literature or film is the wrapping of things up. Literally, denouement means the untying of things. That you've made a knot in the movie, and then it gets all untied at the end. Or you have a bunch of threads and you wrap them all up. That's how we would think about English. It's the opposite in French, from Latin, actually. But it's the final act of a movie where things get resolved, and the disparate threads which have been introduced and seem to be disparate are then showed to all fit together, and they get resolved. There's a verse in Bengali, and it's actually a verse defining love. And it's the word love is used to describe everything from a mild liking. I love that, I love it when the train's on time, or I love English muffins, or I love it when you toast something and it just comes out just right the first time. You can say that. There's nothing wrong in English with saying that. McDonald's can coin the term "I'm loving it" as their slogan for an advertising campaign, and no one said that's a misuse of the English language. So love can be used from everything from a mild liking all the way up to the highest devotion to God. I love God is also an appropriate statement. I love my Egg McMuffin. I love God. And you see what a broad term love is in English, right? Anyway, this verse in Bengali attempts to define love. Atmanendriya pritivanchana tare bolikam. Atmanendriya pritivanchana. Vanchana means desire. Priti, to please. Atma, one's own. Atma is a simple reflexive pronoun. It also means soul. Like alma in Spanish, atma in Sanskrit. The words are etymologically linked. Alma and atma. But in addition to meaning soul, atma also means oneself. Atmanendriya. 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 One's own senses. It's the desire to please one's own senses. Tare, to that, balikam, I say calm, desire. Krishnendriya priti icha, dhare premanam. Krishnendriya priti icha, icha and vancha, same word. The desire to please Krishna's senses. Dhare premanam. That holds the name love. Prem. The desire to please one's own senses, to that I say lust. The same desire, but to please Krishna's senses, that holds the name love. It's a definition of love. And it contrasts love to lust, or mundane desire to spiritual desire. And the amazing thing is it's the same basic impetus. It's the same basic impulse. It's the same basic tendency. We have a tendency to desire things, to think about things, to focus on things, to want things. And when you take that innate propensity to want, to think about, to desire things, and you focus it on narcissistically on pleasing yourself, That becomes desire, which gets into all kinds of trouble. And when you instead selflessly take that same principle and you focus it on pleasing the senses of Krishna, which of course means Krishna has senses, which means Krishna is not less than you or more abstract than you, which means Krishna is actually a being, not necessarily with a body like yours, but with the ability to reciprocate love and understand you and communicate with you. How could God not possess those features if you have them? And so woven within the definition is this very personal understanding of the deity. Desire to please the deity's senses. That is called love. Amazingly, this simple definition in Bengali in many ways encapsulates everything we've gone through in our discussion. We mentioned how Bhakti is about love. The verse is also about love. We talked about how our Renaissance has to be contrasted to the prior state. Similarly, love has to be contrasted to the other state. Something none of us touched on was that we have an innate ability to communicate, I actually said. So I did touch on it a little bit. But we have innate abilities, and then it doesn't become a question of whether you're going to exercise that ability. It becomes a question of what you're going to do with that ability. Whether it's going to eat you up by turning it on yourself, or whether it's going to become beautiful and blossom by directing it in the right way. Like being born with a black belt in communication but not using it and you withering away on the vine. Versus really becoming everything a person can actually be. And there's also a basic understanding, like the fundamental nature of reality is that we should love God. This is a better thing for you to be doing with your time. Don't waste your time doing this, you should be doing this. So the verse is in many ways, it's proselytizing, it's encouraging, it's communicating, it's sharing, it's trying to communicate something and challenge you and enlighten. And it's very simple. Like Bhakti, we define it as being very simple. It's a very simple idea. And it's innate. You automatically have this ability. And it just becomes a question of whether you're going to use this ability to desire in a way that brings out the absolute best in you, or whether you're going to use your ability to desire to create all sorts of havoc for yourself and others. Imagine a world where a small group of people focused on love, on serving others, or on serving what connects you to all others, the deity, the hub of all reality, the cynosure. Imagine that kind of world, like how beautiful that would be. Imagine how great it would be to be a part of a community that espouse that as their ideal. Imagine the value of a life where you even attempted this, even if you met with success and failure over the course of your life. Imagine the value of a life where you even attempted to love like this. Think about how therapeutic this is to the idea of I'm loving it and then I love God, and be using the same term for both, and having a word which is so amorphous and multivalent. It depends on so much context, and you almost can't give a proper definition of love, versus this definition, which is very surgical and very challenging and very definitive and prizes it. That's called love. That holds the name love. What a beautiful thing. It's like it's being held up, like you're holding it on your head as something special. To that I say calm. This holds the name Prem. It's like even Buddha spoke, if you look at like the Four Noble Truths, idam dukkam, this is suffering. Idam dukkha samudaya, this is the cause of suffering. Desire. Idam dukkam nirodha, this is the end of suffering, to get rid of desire. And then idam nirodha pratipad, this is the path to end suffering, which is the Eightfold Noble Path. This takes that another step. It says that that thing which caused you trouble and suffering, desire, if you flip it and you focus your capacity for desiring on loving divinity, then that'll solve all your problems. And so it's not just merely repression, but it's rather that spiritual life consists of a proper focusing of your innate abilities rather than the repression of your base instincts. Just think about how challenging that idea is to most Western thought, most Western religion especially. The Western religion is about, at the best sublimation, but usually repression. But this is not about even sublimation. This is rather about restoring something to its original purpose. You were made to love God. You took a detour. You can go back to that. You'll be who you are actually meant to be. You'll be who you are. You'll stop turning away from who you are. It's very body positive. It's a very positive conception of spirituality. Very life affirming. I did a whole different thing with them. Way more esoteric. And I didn't do any of what I just did with you guys. Because I was able to build to an intermediate advanced level really quickly because I could speak in their language to them. I put on a pretty good show, right, Sanak?
Yeah, it was okay.
I out-Bengali the Bengalis, right? But I'm with you guys because you guys have a whole different background. I focused on, actually teaching I didn't even touch with them. It was too basic for them. But it's not basic. It's really advanced. And there's all these ideas within it, all these really powerful ideas. And if you think about them, it's the act of thinking about them and not skipping over them and marinating in them, thinking about the implications of a verse like this, it's very purifying. Okay, let's do a little kirtan. Thank you so much. Shreeds, Hare Krishna.